Hello friends, welcome to one more video of CS Technology. So in this video, we will be comparing three major cloud providers, which are AWS, GCP and Azure, which we will do at a very high level. So let's begin. So here I have considered a couple of factors, right? Because because comparing cloud providers is not an easy job, so there are multiple scenarios under which we would have to compare them. But here I have taken, let's say, mainly some of the factors, right? So considering the market dominance, AWS, let's say, started the cloud journey, right? Started the cloud computing, because whenever we say cloud computing, the very first thing which comes, first cloud provider which comes to the mind is AWS, right? So AWS has many services in its bucket, right? Starting from databases, from networking, from different latest technologies such as AI, ML, blockchain, right? IoT. So AWS provides you, let's say, plethora of services, right? And it is at a very matured stage, right? It is not at an initial stage where it has to, let's say, understand some of the concepts and try to make the initial things stronger, right? So coming to the services offering, so here you can see that both AWS as well as Azure are almost at a par level, because almost whatever AWS supports or whatever AWS is launching a new service, right, Azure is also backing it up, right? It means that both are hand in hand. So you can compare, if you take any technology, each of the services, there is one service in both the cloud providers, right? But GCP is slightly lagging behind because GCP is not focusing much on the IoT end, uh, right? Yeah, so going to the next factor, which is global infrastructure. So if you see that since AWS started with the cloud computing journey, so what happened here is that AWS has a very strong set of data centers, right? Because when we say data center, it is a physical infrastructure, right? So this is where AWS is again, let's say, much ahead. However, Azure is also not much behind, I would say, right? However, GCP compared to AWS and Azure still need to come up with a very stable, robust infrastructure. Of course, whatever is there, it is of course robust. But when it comes to the different availability zones, regions, so in that case, GCP slightly lags there, right? When it comes to pricing and cost management, all three of them have a decent pricing, right? When I say decent pricing, it can vary between services to services. However, the tools which they provide, which each of them provides to, let's say, manage the cost, check their billing, so all those things are kind of, the services are common across all three of them, right? Now the next very important thing is integration and ecosystem. So when you say integration and ecosystem, uh, cloud computing, the scenarios would be that not always you would develop an application for cloud, right? There might be applications or systems which are running in your data centers, or in your private systems, right? So in that case, what would happen is that you would need to integrate multiple services, and at the same time, let's say, uh, migrate some of the data, right? Or migrate, or let's say, use both the private data center as well as the cloud provider, right? Which is a hybrid model. So in this case, what happens, that your integration and ecosystem should be very seamless, I would say, right? So in this case, what happens, as we have seen, that AWS, GCP as well as Azure provides kind of, let's say, a common ecosystem, right? However, there are a couple of services in which maybe, let's say, AWS would let's say, be highlighted. We would discuss this in further content. So the last one which we have, the last factor which we have, is the documentation and support. So in this case, what we have seen is that all of them have a very detailed documentation. So there is hardly any lag, or let's say hardly any difference between, let's say, one cloud provider to the other cloud provider, because each of them have very extensive documentation. So one very important thing here is with respect to the ecosystem. So one place where Azure kinds of, let's say, highlights itself is in case of Microsoft technologies. So if you have an existing Microsoft technology, if you are using Microsoft technology, let's say, as Active Directory, or let's say their Office suite or something like that, right? So in that case, the integration becomes easier with respect to Azure. right? So yeah, so having said that, let's go to the next slide. So yeah, before uh, explaining this slide, if so far if you are stick on to the video, then I would request you to please like this video and share if you find this useful. Okay, so now this in this slide you would see two, let's say, quadrants, right? So to basically these are called as magic quadrants. Most probably you would know these things. These are uh, released by Gartner, which is a research agency. So on the left side, you can see that there is a magic quadrant for cloud infrastructure and platform services. So what this magic quadrant does in general is that it actually places different vendors, right, or different participants, right, on different areas. Where, for example, this is for cloud computing, there might be something else for blockchain, right? So what they does is that they compare each one of them, project this particular graph based on the ability to execute and how well, what is their vision, right? How whether they can actually execute, how there's long-term vision. So if you consider this, right, so you can see that Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Microsoft as well as Google are in the leader section, right? However, others are still, let's say, coping up with their initial, let's say, uh, preparations, everything's right. So, however, if you see that even between these three, AWS, Microsoft, and GCP, so AWS is as the leader, which it has a very good, let's say, infrastructure, everything. It knows how the ability to execute, right? So that's what it says. And when it comes to the visionaries, right, which you can see here, so both are almost on the same place. Now on the right side, since we are since now the trend is mainly with respect to the AI and ML, right? So the right side, you can see that this is released on March 2023, and this magic quadrant is for cloud, AI, and developer services. Okay, and if you see here, Microsoft is leading here, right? But again, Amazon Web Services, AWS is also not falling much behind, right? So this just I wanted to show you the comparison at a market level, at an industry level, how it happens. Yeah, so going to the next slide. So now, having said all that, which one should you choose? So it's something as a saying goes, right? So one size doesn't fit all. So it's not like that one cloud is going to fit all your needs, right? So let's see what's the factor. What are the factors? So I assume that most of the audience here are freshers, or they are new to the IT field, or they want to start a journey in the cloud computing uh, area, right? So in that case, what I would suggest is that for this category of people, AWS, GCP, Azure are all same, right? In the sense, all of them are giving you some standard set of services, but the main place where you need to focus on are the basics, right? Your fundamentals. So what is virtualizations? Virtualization, what is networking, what is storage, right? What are microservices? You would need to understand how a web development happens, right? So from your front end, back end, then how, what are the REST APIs? How do you host them? Where do you host them? When you say database, what kind of database do you need, right? So if you have a thorough understanding of all these sections, right, after that, then it is better for you to jump into the actual cloud computing area, right? Going to the next step, which is experienced professional. So I believe that you would already have a clear idea, because you would already be knowing what web development is, how your application development is in general. Where do you host it, right? What is CI/CD? How do you deploy everything? So for experienced professional, it is mainly based on your previous experience, which cloud technology which you have already used, right? For which more of your, I mean, you have much of hands-on, right? Where you are much flexible. But what happens is that once you are experienced, you will not compare in only in these terms, right? It's not only about the usage, it's also about while selecting a particular service, right, based on your requirements, which one do you select, right? So that is where, let's go to the next factor, which is technicalities and requirements, right? So many a times what happens, it also depends on it, what is your experience level. If you are a person who is architecting a particular solution on a cloud, so then you have the flexibility to select a particular cloud, right, at a high level, right, because there's no cloud vendor as of now selected. But if you are more of a senior developer, or let's say a team lead who is taking some requirements from the client or from existing architecture architects, right, so in that case you need to follow whatever they say, right. So but of course it depends from companies to companies, that whether there could be some multi-cloud options, right, where for example if there is one service which is best supported by, let's say, Azure, right, and then why don't we choose that, right, then so you can go multi-cloud, right, so that's also one of the options. So yeah, so the bottom line here is that with respect to the requirement, many times what could also happen is that maybe your client will enforce you to use a particular cloud, right. It also depends on that, for example, let's say there are some legacy systems, right, and then that would best suit for a particular cloud provider itself, right. Or maybe the client is already using AWS, then if they are developing if they want to launch a particular new application, so the tendency to go to some other cloud provider is not so open, right. So in that case they would tend to go with the AWS itself. So having said that, let's go to the next important factor, which is the use cases. So as I said earlier that each of the, especially when it comes to AWS and Azure, so they have almost many of the services which are in common, right? However, GCP is, the trend is to mainly use from Kubernetes, from big data analytics, so from those perspective. But when it comes to blockchain, IoT, AI, ML, right? So these kind of scenarios, AWS and Azure kinds of pops up, right. So they are rated at a higher level because they have dedicated managed services. So there are other important cases when it comes to migration and integration with existing systems. So just a quick mention about what is migration. So when we say migration, it's about, let's say, your maybe let's say your application is hosted on your private data center, and you want to leverage the capabilities of database storage and database services of cloud, right. In that case probably you would need to migrate your existing, let's say, database or the storage to cloud, right. So this is also a very important use case, right, your migration, right. So in this case also you would be choosing a particular cloud, right. Now at the end, which is very important, is about the certification. So what I would say here is that a certification could just make you eligible for a particular, let's say, interview or maybe at your workplace. But what matters most is your knowledge in that particular area. So if you are at an entry level, then what I would suggest is go ahead with any of the fundamentals of fundamental certifications from AWS, GCP or Azure. If you are at a mid level, then you would be already using a cloud provider. You might already have a fundamental, let's say, certification from any of these cloud providers. So in that case, what I would suggest is if you have completed your fundamental certification, then probably you should attempt for the associate level of certification. Just giving an example, if you have already completed AWS cloud practitioner, then you can attempt for architect associates, or maybe if you want to go ahead with the DevOps, then maybe DevOps associate or developer associate, things like that. And if you are an experienced level, then it is better you go multi-cloud, right. You kind of, let's say, established your knowledge, validate your knowledge in multi-cloud aspect, right. So those are some of the pointers with respect to the certification. So having said that, the trend nowadays is with respect to the multi-cloud, and even uh, companies are developing cloud agnostic application, right. So I hope you got an overall idea of which cloud vendor do you choose, right? If you, I would request you to comment to this video on which cloud provider you are choosing based on your experience, right? So far, if you have liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe our channel. Thank you.